Let's talk about this trade war that's been going on a little bit with China. And I guess I'd like to ask you, do you think that Donald Trump was right in calling out the Chinese government and basically putting them on notice?
I won't have any comment on that. In terms of political activity, I don't put my citizenship in a blind trust. So when the election comes around, I'll do something. On the other hand, people will interpret things I say about any president, as to some extent coming from Berkshire, and they don't come from Berkshire. I'm just an individual, so I think I'm glad to talk about China, but I can't talk to you about that part of it.
Fair enough. I mean, do you think there was room for improvement then in terms of the trade relationship between China and the United States?
Well, I think that China and the United States absolutely are destined to be the superpowers, beyond my great-grandchildren lives, and will always be competitors, and will be competitors in business, we'll be competitors in ideas, all kinds of ways. And there's no other way it would be. And we just have to make sure that competition doesn't get us to a point where we don't realize that the best world is one in which both the United States and China prosper. I mean, we do not want to have an island of prosperity in the rest of the world, envious of us in a nuclear age. And China doesn't, Russia doesn't. I mean, we all recognize the dangers of letting competition get out of control and become, you can be competitors without being enemies. And that's what all powerful nations have to realize over time. I mean, it's different than 200 years ago when you could have some dominant country, and then they may have done some things that you didn't like, but it didn't threaten the existence of the world. You really threaten the existence of the world, as we know it, if important countries do not constantly recognize that they can compete, they can fight over certain things, but they can't regard it as essentially the equivalent of war.
Here's a question from Kevin Chen, who is a Berkshire shareholder and an NYU professor. And he says, and this is sort of along the lines of what you were just saying, Warren, but do you think that U.S. and China will be able to resolve their differences, or are conflicts unavoidable?
Well, I don't think conflicts are unavoidable, but I think it has to be active thinking on the part of every hugely powerful country. And Russia is hugely powerful. I mean, 90% of the nuclear arms in the world are between U.S. and Russia. So they have to recognize that the best world for them is one where they don't try and grab all the apples, basically. And we have to recognize that. And we can't, in the United States, we can't think that either our ideas run the world, or we start getting aggressive about things, and China can't think that, and Russia can't think that. And that's obvious. You just have to make things, you got to be sure things don't escalate. You have World War I, with an archduke, I mean, you get these, you can get chance incidents, and you really want to, I asked one of the presidents one time, in terms of what he would do if awakened in the middle of the night with somebody coming to him and saying, absolutely, somebody else has launched, and would you launch on that? And you've got 10 minutes to decide. And I wouldn't want to have that responsibility, but you want to make sure you don't get to that point.
Right, right. Would you ever make a big acquisition in China? And if not, aren't you missing a huge portion of the world?
Yeah, the answer is we would. Yeah, we would.
Have you looked?
We've been made aware of some things, yeah.
Are you concerned, on the flip side of the coin, are you concerned that the rule of law is different, that the accounting might be opaque?
Well, I'd want to be sure I understood the accounting, obviously. In some businesses that'd be easier to do than others. But I know the laws, the customs, the accounting, the people better in the United States than any place else. So some small hurdle in many countries to get over, which I can get over. I mean, but I just don't. It's just not as easy as looking at something where I already know the answer, from previous transactions or something of the sort. So it's easier to make a big acquisition in the United States. I have to do more work if I'm looking beyond the borders. But I love the idea of doing it. When we made the acquisition in Israel a dozen years ago, I didn't know what the tax rates were there. I didn't know what corporate law. I suspected that it would all be answered satisfactorily, which it was, but I didn't just automatically know it.
It seems like you're more open about doing a deal in China than in previous conversations.
I don't think so. No,
It's out there.
I'm open. Yeah,
Right.
we made 2 decent-sized stock acquisitions there, and they worked out fine.
Those are?
Well, PetroChina and BYD.
BYD, yes.
Yeah, BYD was Charlie's, but
Right.
Charlie's very well versed on China.
Right.
But,
The U.S. trade deficit has been widening, and of course, a lot of that has to do with our trade with China. Is that something that worries you?
well, I wrote an article about it for Fortune and the trade situation many years ago, and when our deficit got to be large in relation to GDP. I don't think it's essential to have a trade balance, but I think that if a trade deficit gets large and it looks like you have no way out from it, that can be a real problem over time. I mean, you're shipping little pieces of paper to the rest of the world, and they're shipping you goods. I mean, people are working, making underwear or shoes someplace, and they get little pieces of paper from us. And it gets very tempting if you've done that enough to make sure that those little pieces of paper aren't worth very much over time when they want to cash them for something. So you don't want to have, we don't have any problem running trade deficits, but if we ran really large ones and we sort of worked ourselves into a box where we didn't really have a solution to get the numbers down, it could be a problem. And I wrote about it one time, but it's kind of a nice thing, actually. I mean, wouldn't you like to have something where you just send out little pieces of paper and somebody keep supplying you with your food or your, whatever?
I'm living it.
Right? Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, we call them credit cards in the United States.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. And last question. China is facing its slowest growth in nearly 3 decades. The leadership there lowered the targets, I think, to around 6.5%, 6%. Are you concerned about this slowing growth and the impact on global markets?
Well, I don't worry about it in terms of global markets. I mean, China's going to grow a lot over time. I mean, when you think of what's happened, this is 1949 or whatever, but there's been nothing really like it. I mean, you had 20% of the world's population at that time, perhaps, it really hadn't remotely achieve their potential. I mean, they had the intellectual capacity, they had a decent soil, all kinds of things. I mean, and what's happened there almost is beyond belief. And that game's not over, but we've had incredible developments in the United States. I mean, real GDP per capita is 6 times what it was the day I was born in the United States. 6 times. And we thought we were a pretty developed country then and everything. No, my parents wouldn't have believed it. I mean, they would have thought, that this kid has really got it made. Make more in the United States, and it was true. I mean, we had this tailwind, and China's had a hurricane behind it, in recent decades.
In a good way.
Absolutely.
Because you were comparing it to the tailwind of the hurricane at your back.
At their back, and they've found a way of life that is dramatically different than existed for the billion. There was a billion then, maybe a billion 2 or 3, whatever it is now, and they have changed a country really of size. I don't think there's ever been anything like it. We've done it too, but it took somewhat longer. I mean, it was more stretched out. It was a remarkable period, but when you go to, I first went there in 1995, and then they regarded it as a miracle. And then I went back 10 years later, and it was a whole different country beyond that.
Warren Buffett, thanks very much.